Hello and welcome to Series 4 of Autism in Conversation with Auticon, a podcast from Auticon, a global IT consultancy whose consultants are all autistic. We're here with this podcast to help raise greater understanding and appreciation of autism through fascinating conversation with fantastic guests. Hosted by me, Carrie Grant MBE. Each episode will feature inspirational guests from all walks of life who each share a passion for making the world more inclusive. We'll be talking about the many benefits of hiring neurodivergent talent, through to some of the more common challenges faced by autistic adults navigating the workplace, plus so much more. All of my 4 children are neurodivergent, so this is a subject very close to my heart. And I'm really looking forward to facilitating some great conversations about autism and hopefully learning some new things along the way. I hope you enjoy it. Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. Now, the number of people diagnosed with autism has increased significantly since the 1990s. In this episode, we look at what the diagnostic process involves, along with signposting for people who may be looking for more information as they take their next steps towards getting a diagnosis. We'll also talk about what the implications are for autistic people within the workplace, of course, because that's what we do here on this podcast. And today I'm joined by Russ Botting, lead job coach at Auticon, Lou Chandler, student and social media influencer, also known as neurodivergent Lou, and Dr. Kath Fielder, a GP and clinician at Neurospectrum. It's lovely to have you with me today. Look at your lovely faces up there on the Zoom. They're gorgeous, guys. They really are. Now, we cover so many topics on this podcast, and today we want to take things right back to basics, because there are many people listening who have very limited knowledge of what autism actually is. We always find that there's lots of people that are new to our podcast or new to autism. So just a few questions for you, Kath, seeing as you're a GP and clinician. Can you start off by telling us what is the sort of definition of autism?
So autism is a lifelong neurodevelopmental difference. So every person who is autistic is different. And they will all have a combination of neurotypical and neurodivergent features in specific areas that can make living in a neurotypical world quite difficult. And so the areas are language, perception, executive function, sensory processing, and motor skills. So to translate that into kind of normal life, language in terms of how we use it, so verbal and non-verbal, perception, how we interpret and understand other people and their behaviour, executive function, so that's things like organisation, planning, decision making, sensory processing, so how we manage and deal with information to our senses from the outside world and also from our internal world, and motor skills, so how we control our bigger and smaller muscles. Now, the key thing with autism is it's in autistic spectrum. So if you imagine a kind of circle split into wedges, one for each of those categories, each autistic person will have difficulties or strength in each of those different areas. And so that's why you can't say this is what autism looks like. And that's why that was such a long answer.
No, I think it needs. I think you did very well, actually. I always love asking that question to people, you know, what is autism? And they're like, gosh, where do I even begin? So that was very good. Roughly how many people in the UK are diagnosed as autistic then?
And I think that's the key word, isn't it? It's how many are diagnosed as autistic as opposed to how many actually are autistic. Yeah. I believe that the National Autistic Society suggests that there are 700,000 autistic people in the UK. But I think as a result of the difficulties with diagnosis that we're going to be talking about today, I suspect the number is significantly higher.
Yeah, I expect it is too. What are some of the key signs that, you know, if people are listening to this and someone might have said to them, I think you're autistic, and they've thought, well, am I? I don't know if I am or not. What would we be looking for?
Again, it's going to be quite a complicated answer, I'm afraid, but I'll try and make it as useful to people as possible. And it's really variable, and it's important, again, to note the word might be autistic. There are other conditions or states that can mimic certain attributes, and there's lots of overlay with it, things like anxiety or trauma. So it's really important to look at the whole person rather than an isolated behaviour. And if you are wondering, either from this podcast or from anything that you've seen, that you or someone you care about might be autistic, it is really important to seek a thorough assessment from somebody who knows what they're doing. So by that I mean, don't be put off if a GP tells you that you can't be autistic because your eye contact's okay.
Oh my gosh, the number of times I've had that said of my children.
I know, exactly.
Like, oh look, they make eye contact. Do they make eye contact? Yep. Oh, they speak? Yep.
Yeah, exactly. But if I'm going to try and relate it back to the categories I talked about at the beginning, if that's okay. Yeah. So with language, you might see a delay in speech development in childhood, or you might see some unusual patterns with people repeating certain words or phrases, either for comfort for themselves or because they've heard it. Sometimes younger children might refer to themselves in the third person. So they might say, Kath doesn't like mashed potato, maybe when they're 6, 7, 8. And in older people, you might see that language being described as blunt, because people will say what they mean. With no...
I really love that. I love that because you know where you stand.
It's like so
it's
great.
Much there's a security. There's a security in that.
I've made you this, my love. I don't like it. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But they might speak in a monotonous way, or maybe without some of the social sing-songs that people would expect. And non-verbal language can also be reduced with absent or limited eye contact, especially if someone's overwhelmed or distressed. Yeah. And varying degrees of facial expressions and gestures. So that's the kind of language area. In terms of perception, you can see a limited understanding of what other people mean, so a difficulty in interpreting what someone means through their expressions, their body language, or some subtleties of verbal language. So a lot of socially acceptable language actually makes no sense at all. So sarcasm or metaphors, you might see someone really not knowing what you talk about, and also maybe feeling uncomfortable or overwhelmed by social contact if it's not something that they have initiated themselves.
Do you think some of that is because the rules that are out there are all the ones that were made by the neuropredominant people, which is what we call neurotypical?
Yes.
So therefore, the way that we understand each other is through language and is through body language or facial expressions or tone of voice. When I meet so many autistic people who have a really deep empathy, so they feel the room, they're feeling the room, they're doing the communication in some ways in a more intense way, and they have a greater understanding. They just don't do it in the way that is expected.
Yes, absolutely. And I think so much of it is so bizarre. I remember when, because I have a son who's autistic, and when he was little, I remember he would, please and thank you. Please and thank you is so weird. It's just a little dance, isn't it? It's just, it's something that you learn to say to be polite, but it's such a step removed. It doesn't mean that you're a nice person. It means that you've just learned that you have to say that.
Yeah, or that you're particularly pleased or thankful.
Exactly. You just say it, and someone's giving you some present that's rubbish, and you hate it, and you're really disappointed because you thought you could have a present, you've actually got this rubbish thing, and now you've got to say
the
thank
pressure.
You.
Yeah, the pressure. What does the diagnostic process involve?
And I think there's a huge difference between what should happen in an ideal world and what does happen. So in an ideal world, I think concerns would either be raised or listened to by an experienced member of school or a healthcare team, and then this would lead to a referral into a specialist service with some signposting to useful resources for support in the meantime. And then
you have an option to wait for 5 years or pay $3.5K.
100. Yes, that's basically it. And
sorry, I'm jesting, being sarcastic.
No, but it's true.
Yeah, or longer. You're right. Yeah.
But when you are diagnosed currently in the NHS, you get a letter that says, "Congratulations, you're autistic." You have a photocopied sheet of resources, and then you're discharged. That's it.
Yes, that's insane. When I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease, you're given a pathway and you're given a consultant and you're given help.
A specialist nurse.
Yes, all of the above. Yeah. Let's move on to Lou because we want to hear our other voices. This has been great, Kath. Thank you so much for all of those details. How old were you when you were diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed when I was 15, so 6 years ago now.
So 15 years old. And what would have led up to you being diagnosed?
So there were a number of different things that kind of led up to it, but mainly I was struggling with anxiety and mental health generally at the time, which is what made me realise I was autistic, although looking back now, there were lots of different signs. So for example, the sensory issues, so I really struggled going to loud places and everything felt amplified. So noises, strong smells, things like that be really difficult. And then also socially, I really struggled. So like the back and forth elements of conversations were quite difficult. I didn't always know how to respond to people or how to follow like the norms of conversation. And it made it difficult for me to interact with people like my own age and build friendships and like relationships. So I learned to mask those struggles though, which is why it took such a long time for me to get diagnosed. So it was, a long process.
When you talk about what you were experiencing, Lou, that is a really classic presentation for those assigned female at birth for girls. And do you ever wish, why didn't no one notice this?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of autistic people struggle with feeling like almost the grief of we've gone this long without realising my life would have been so much easier if I just knew and if other people knew, and we wouldn't have been given some of the like other labels that we were given. So for example, being seen as naughty, disruptive, rude, or whatever it is. I think it's makes it a bit like difficult because of the like non-stereotypical autism presentation, not realizing that you're autistic because you don't fit the box of what autism is seen to look like in like the media, for example.
Absolutely. And what did your diagnosis, your assessment, what did that involve? Where did you go and what did you do?
So I was already with CAMS, so Children and Adolescent Mental Health Services, for my mental health. So I received a diagnosis through them, and it was a number of different steps which involved having a conversation with my parents and other family members around my early years and the different milestones. So what age did you learn to walk and talk, because sometimes autistic people have delay reaching those milestones. I also had conversations around the different autistic traits I experienced and did questionnaires around that type of thing. So it would ask things about sensory differences or social communication, executive functioning. And I also had a ADOS visit thing where you do different tasks around things that are designed to pick up on whether you're autistic or not. So different tasks, whether that be like reading a book or doing imaginative play or whatever it was, to kind of pick up on autistic traits.
Amazing. And what was your response? You know, I'm imagining what you said, you know, by the time you were 15, you were struggling with your mental health, struggling with anxiety, and then you get given what could be seen as a label. You get given an answer. You get given this word autism. And you are then, that's it, you're autistic. What did you feel at that point?
I think it was so many different things, like surprise, because I didn't know much about autism apart from like the stereotypes. I think it was surprise that actually fitted me, but also a relief in terms of I'm not making this up. This isn't a personal failing. This is my brain being wired differently. This is me being autistic rather than anything else. So I think it was relief, shock, feeling like finally I have an answer and an understanding of myself, and hopefully it will lead to me being able to advocate and get the support I need.
Amazing. I love the way you talk about that. It's fantastic. Russ, you worked in diagnostic service. Tell us what that was like.
Yeah, it's interesting, and to hear Lou's experience, that it kind of echoes again that kind of important experience of the autism assessment being such a crucial part of someone's experience. And you have to be aware of the waiting list, how long someone has waited to get that assessment and to be in that place. So it's really important and crucial to get that right. So the actual, and Lou's put it brilliantly actually, is the ADOS is to essentially elicit autistic kind of behaviours and experiences and kind of look at kind of social interaction, elements of kind of social imagination. So things like that kind of construction tasks. The idea that a lot of the tasks don't actually test what they kind of initially set out to test. It looks at kind of how does one interact in that environment. So looking at kind of puzzles, it's not about kind of completing the puzzles, it's about how do you ask for the tools or the puzzle to complete the task. In it, there's even kind of break sections, and the idea is to look at how does a person initiate a conversation, and they end conversation, a bit about what Kath was referring to earlier in terms of the diagnostic criteria around kind of intuitive elements of social communication interaction. The ADOS tries to look at kind of those very intuitive elements of social communication interaction in a greater sense, and it's kind of an observation schedule. So it's the autism diagnostic observation schedule. So it really is, in some ways, quite subjective. I think there's a lot of debate around the kind of the usefulness of the ADOS versus kind of the DISCO, which is kind of a little bit more kind of and a lot better at assessing the distinction in kind of female presentation of autism.
So that's a type of assessment form, isn't it? The DISCO.
The DISCO, yeah, that's right. So my main experience is in ADOS, but I'm conscious and aware that the DISCO has been kind of found to be slightly better at kind of assessing the different presentation of autism. But of course, the ADOS is the most regularly used currently, and as I say, looks at different kind of areas of social kind of reciprocity, so turn taking and communication as well. And as Lou said, kind of looking at kind of how you describe emotions and attention to detail in different kind of conversations and things like that, and also kind of elements of social imagination as well.
I know that some autism diagnostic services use autistic people in their assessments, and I always think that's a brilliant way of doing things, because there is almost, maybe this is probably too much of a sweeping statement, but quite often autistic people will know other autistic people. They feel them, they sense them. So, and in the service, Kath, that you're working in now, they use autistic people, do they?
So, yeah, at Neurospectrum, every professional has lived experience of neurodivergence. So I have ADHD, and many of the other staff members are, well, everybody is neurodivergent and or have neurodivergent children. And there's a funny little homing device.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is with neurodivergence.
I used to sit in my children's parties when they had the class over for parties, and I'd always have a couple of the TAs as my helpers in the party, and we'd be sitting there going, yeah, that one, this one's got that one. You'd kind of know, you think, why is it that the professional services don't know that, and we're just a bunch of, people that are outside of all of that profession, and it's quite clear to us, the children, I'm not saying we were always right, but, quite often it has been a parent or a person who's autistic, or there might be both, a parent and autistic, going to other parents going, by the way, if you're interested, your child, you might want to get them tested for ADHD or autism. Okay, let's move on to the pitfalls and versus the best practice. We've looked at the overall picture of what autism is and what the diagnostic process might involve. However, everyone on this panel I know has personal experience, and often that shows that it's not always clear-cut and it's not always straightforward. So, Russ, let's go straight back to you. You work for Auticon, and anyone who doesn't know, can you briefly explain what the company does?
Yeah, sure. So Auticon are an IT consultancy, so we employ autistic IT consultants in the areas of data analytics, data science and cybersecurity. So we are a social enterprise, so we exist to further our social mission, which is to improve the current underemployment rate of autistic adults, which, according to the Office for National Statistics, sits at around 22%. So the real differentiator for Auticon as well is that all our consultants have a designated job coach who's a neurodiversity or specialist in psychology, has a lived or personal experience in autism or neurodivergent conditions, and provides that real kind of practical emotional support for consultants inside and outside of projects, communication, regional adjustments to functioning strategies as well. So with decades of experience working with our consultants, it's enabled us to further another social mission, which is to support all neurodivergent employees in their teams through our neuro inclusion service. So we work with businesses and organisations on their neuro inclusion journeys of building awareness through training and understanding. So running business transformation as well. So in the context of university, so understanding what is the company doing and where can they improve, what are they doing well in terms of their maturity around attraction, recruitment, onboarding, disclosure, retention of all neurodivergent conditions and employees, and also providing job coaching as a service for internal employees as well. So that's really enables us to kind of go further that social mission. So we're also focusing on supporting employees and employers more broadly as well.
I love that you're across both areas and all spaces in between. But, when you're talking anecdotally to the clients that you work with, the consultants themselves who are autistic, what is their experience when you have those chats? What's their experience of the assessment and the diagnostic pathway that they've been down?
Yeah, so just to give a bit of context, so our consultants' our age range is between around 22 and 65, and around 85% are between 22 and 44. So as you can imagine, there's a great degree of variance in both age, time of diagnosis and experience of the process. But we tend to see more commonly in our consultants being diagnosed now during university. So thankfully, most of our consultants, in terms of anecdotally, have had quite a helpful and supportive process during that time. So they've gained a diagnosis whilst at university, and it's led to a better understanding of themselves, areas of support that they may need in terms of reasonable adjustments. But of course, in terms of, or in respect of the timing, university is such an important time, isn't it? So in developing oneself, sense of identity and self. Yeah. And obviously receiving a diagnosis at a time, it can be a lot to manage as well in that time, and starting that process of learning acceptance of a diagnosis and what it means to that person. We also see a lot of our consultants with later diagnosis, so in their kind of 30s, 40s, and maybe even beyond. And again, that's usually commonly due to as you were mentioning earlier, their children receiving a diagnosis. So they're realising or understanding some of the areas or going through the diagnostic process and realising that actually also fits for their own lived experience as well. And of course, kind of part of our neuro-inclusion service, as I mentioned, that's, especially the job coaching service we provide, often the referrals we receive are for that reason for employees who've recently been diagnosed at work, and in some case, maybe through occupational health or periods of stress or burnout. And so kind of in a sense, job coaching kind of serves dual purpose of both supporting the actual individual at work, but also kind of helping them through that diagnostic process, helping them understand and make sense of their diagnosis and kind of any difficulties they may be having at work as well. So kind of often kind of an essential component of coaching is that kind of enabling that individual to reflect on kind of what areas of work may or may not be impacted by autism or even D, for example.
Yeah, and really important, I think, just to hear you saying about when someone has just been diagnosed, I think there is this assumption that they suddenly know everything about autism. And of course, they don't. They're newly diagnosed. It's just a word that they've been given that helps them to explain themselves to themselves. But then you then have to filter your entire life through that new lens. And that can take time. And then if you're being asked, okay, what adjustments do you need? Some people are like, I don't know what adjustments I need. I'm not even sure what I need. So it's great that they have people like yourself to help people to process some of that.
Learning to advocate for yourself is hard, particularly when you've spent all your life masking. So you spent all your life trying to fit in and make it be okay. It's really hard getting your head round that you're allowed to advocate for yourself. And I found that really difficult. And I know that I've got friends who have as well. I don't know, Lou, if that's something you struggle to just definitely get your head round.
Yeah, it's like kind of trying to make sense of a world which you have only just started to understand, and everything is different to what you thought it would be, in terms of you're now understanding that you're autistic and giving yourself permission to ask for adjustments, and understanding and knowing what adjustments you need can be really difficult.
Absolutely. I think for children that have been diagnosed young, the other thing that happens, because it has to happen, because there's not really the help in the education system on many occasions, is that parents advocate for their children, and then the parents have to become warriors in order to get the adjustments that their children need. And then, of course, the children are so used to the parent always doing the speaking, then that switch over. I know for me, it's like I'm just, always trying to do that thing of, okay, now you speak for yourself. It's your voice we need to hear. It's really important that we hear that. Kath, if we could go back to you, why is it that so many people are being diagnosed late? Russ says there, we're talking about 40s, 50s and beyond. Why is that happening? I mean, it's great that it's happening and they're getting the diagnosis, but why is it so late?
Personally, I think there's a few factors for it. So first of all, it's definitely these outdated views in society, but also within healthcare and within education. I think that, as we've mentioned, the presence of eye contact or friendships or affection, or the fact that people are managing at school or managing to work, all lead many people to believe that they couldn't possibly be autistic. It's important to note that I'm a GP with a special interest in mental health. So I was a right geek. As a student, I would, on my weekends, go and shadow mental health. I was really interested in mental health. I had no idea that I had ADHD or my son was dual diagnosed ADHD and autistic. I did not have an up-to-date awareness of neurodiversity, and I'm interested.
Yes.
And it's barely touched on at medical school, and in terms of, and the resources are there, the nice guidance are really good, they're up to date, but that leads me on to the next point, which is that we have an absolutely exhausted workforce. So in terms of education and healthcare, they're on their knees, due to chronic underfunding, they're absolutely on their knees and they're just firefighting. So do you think,
in a way, we're talking about training, but I know that, I run a parent support group for over 200 families that I've run for the last 10 years. And I would say in that 10 years, we've met a number of GPs and also Senkos. So these are people that, whose child has been diagnosed. That's why they're in our group. And every single one of them with fail has said, oh my gosh, now I've got a child that is autistic. Now I'm seeing, what did I do with that person, particularly Senkos? I did that child before 5 years ago. I should have been doing that for them. And I think there's been a huge amount of regret, if I can say that, in some of our parents who also have those dual roles. Do you think that maybe you just have to have lived experience to get it?
I think at the moment, yes, if I'm honest. I think if you go and see a GP about it, I think unless they have specifically kept themselves up to date with guidance or they have lived experience of it, I don't think they would have an up-to-date and decent understanding of neurodivergence. But the guidance is there. The NICE guidance is brilliant, really good. It says always listen to concerns, don't dismiss just because of eye contact, but people are firefighting. So nobody in education or healthcare is currently in a headspace to take on this new information.
Right.
And so as part of my role in Neurospectrum, I'm hoping to make some resources to have to disseminate, to just say, look, this is how, it's not hard. These are the basics. This is how you can guide people along. Because people don't, I think a lot of GPs aren't aware of it, but they haven't got the headspace to even start to take it on. But as well as that, I think that many autistic people are absolutely masters at masking. So I think the stereotype that you have in your head is somebody who maybe, difficulty with communication, not in mainstream education, not having functioning relationships. And so these people who are masking their heads off all day, every day, they're going underneath people's radars because it's not till they go home that they struggle because they've held it in all day. So they're going under the radar.
Several years ago, I co-wrote a pamphlet that went to all GPs in the UK that was called Girls and Autism Flying Under the Radar. So it's exactly this subject that went worldwide. It was made with the National Association of Special Educational Needs. It's still out there. It's a great leaflet, a little booklet, and it was really, really helpful. And when I'm thinking about that booklet now, I'm thinking, Lou, you are exactly the person that we were speaking about in that book. And I'm thinking it's, we talk about late diagnosis, but as far as I'm concerned, 15 is late. It's too late. It should have happened much earlier for you. And you started your own social media platform with Neurodivergent Lou, your handle. Why did you start that?
Yeah, so I guess it was a combination of feeling like there was not enough information out there by autistic people for autistic people. And I really wanted to fill that gap because when I first started researching autism, when I was diagnosed, it was a lot based for parents or professionals. And we definitely need that information out there. But we also need stuff for autistic people by autistic people. I think it was also feeling isolated at the time. I started my Instagram page during lockdown. So it was a time of feeling isolated, and not really connecting with other autistic people, so that was definitely one of the reasons. But yeah, like I wanted to create information that would make sense to people and the information that I felt I would have needed. So I kind of do all sorts of things like simplifying what the diagnosis criteria means to like make it sense in real life, or giving people advice on how to advocate for themselves, to try and support autistic people to understand what the actual steps of doing this type of thing are in terms of advocating, like how do you actually go about it, because some of these things are big words but we don't really understand like what that actually looks like. So yeah, it was a kind of process of really needing information and wanting that information out there.
And what kinds of conversations do you have with people online? What kind of stuff are they talking about with you?
So it can be like anything from like, yeah, what autism looks like in different presentations of autism, to what sort of things you can put in place to support your life, autistic traits, but also like kind of people's experiences are so powerful, and it can be really powerful for everyone to be able to share like what helps them, what doesn't help them, different experiences they've had. Like if people have had like a bad experience or whatever, sometimes they'll be like in the comments section, and then other people all supporting each other, which is like the loveliest thing to see. And it's like, yeah, the space like for autistic people to be themselves and to like authentically share. So yeah, the conversations are really, really important.
Lou, it's amazing that you're doing that, and I really want to thank you. I know so many young people who need that space, so it's wonderful that you're providing that platform. So thinking about how we can get the best case scenario for our autistic community, Kath, what do people need to do if they or someone they know is thinking they may be autistic? What's the first steps?
I think it's brilliant now. There's so many resources online that you can, that are raising awareness and that people are sort of looking at and sharing, and it's definitely bringing the conversation a lot more to the forefront. It's brilliant. I think that for the reasons I described previously, don't presume that the professional that you're talking to has a decent understanding of neurodiversity. Don't go to see if they agree. Go to tell them.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think so. What you need is their agreement to refer you on. So I think you need to go prepared, and you need to make it easy for them to know what to do. So there are standard tools that you can complete beforehand. So there's the M-Chat, so M-CHAT, which is for younger children, and there's the Asperger's Quotient, which is the AQ10 questionnaire. They're all readily available online, and I would say fill that out before you go and see the healthcare professional, either on behalf of yourself or the person that you're considering, and have some examples with you, even maybe written down when you go. Because the chances are, if you have read into it to the level which I'm sure you have, you may well already have a better understanding than they do.
Yes,
and I think
that's so important.
I think don't go and then them say, oh no, because their eye contact's okay. You know, I know so many people who've had that conversation and it's delayed their diagnosis for 5 years because they didn't want to go and talk to anyone about it again because they felt silly.
So I guess one of the things, in fact, Kath, might be, and I always say this to people I work with and with my kids, if you're going to go for any meeting, what do you want the outcome to be? I think if you know what the outcome is, certainly with the GP, because when you go to the GP, most of us think you go to a GP when you're sick and they give you some medicine and you get better. That's in the very rawest, basic way. But actually, when it comes to referring on, that's such an important point you've made there. Really, you are just using the GP to get your referral on. They're not the end game, are they? They are just someone you need. They're a gatekeeper, if you like. They're the people they're going to open the gate for you to get to the people that will really be able to hopefully help you.
And the terrifying thing is that I think there's a lot of GPs who don't know some of the gates exist. So, for example, right to choose. I've had many friends who I have signposted to go and see their GP about either a query or, well, autism, ADHD. And the GP didn't know anything about right to choose. I've written referral letters for my friends to take with them along with a completed form, and the GP slid it back over the table to them and said no. So there's a massive variation, but I know consistently that there are lots of GPs who don't know about right to choose. So if you can take the form with you, and say, oh no, it's an NHS provider. You just need to Google right to choose autism, and it brings up the page. It even has a letter to print out if you have some resistance from the GP. So it's a wonderful resource. But again, don't presume that they know about it.
I imagine loads of people right now are reaching for their pen and their piece of paper and writing down right to choose, or they are literally Googling it as you're talking there, Kath. Yeah, absolutely. That's so helpful. Russ, for people entering the workforce, how can they either advocate for themselves or get the advocacy that they need to help them thrive?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, as we talk about to consider, is what would you, as you said, what would you want to get from advocacy? What does that mean for you? So is that in terms of physical support adjustments, executive functioning adjustments, information processing, communication, sensory, emotional support, working patterns? What are the key elements for you? And knowing what you need will then enable you to kind of have an idea of what will enable you to thrive at work, and then start that communication. And of course, kind of then having an idea of what you need can then help you inform the employer more about kind of what are actually elements of communication is going to be useful, and kind of what would be best suited for you. But of course, a key component of self-advocacy is disclosure. So, and we know that a number of neurodivergent employees are kind of unsure or reluctant to disclose about because due to the uncertainty of how an employer will react, or perhaps they've had previous bad experiences of disclosure. So it's also about kind of feeling or understand how you would feel about the employer's response, or whether you feel comfortable having that discussion, and whether it's the right time for you, because you can disclose at any point in an employment process, whether it's the application process, the recruitment process. When you've started a role, you can kind of advocate and disclose at any point that's right for you. It does make it easier for yourself and also for the employer from a legal perspective if you do disclose, because the employer then has a legal responsibility under the Equality Act to implement reasonable adjustments. So in terms of knowing what kind of the process is for you and kind of what reasonable adjustments, disclosure can help with that. But of course, I appreciate that self-advocacy is quite daunting, and it can be quite a vulnerable place, and is inherently uncertain. So it is quite a daunting place, as I say. So there are ways, there are organisations that you can look to for support and guidance, advice. So Access to Work is one of those. So that's the government service that provides support through your employer, and that will include things like training, workplace assessments, or even coaching to identify reasonable adjustments. There's other organisations such as Voiceability, which are a specific advocacy service that can provide advice. So not just advice, but also resources about kind of what your rights are and how to advocate. As we talked about, ASANS, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, also ambitious about autism and NAS, and have an advocacy service as well. So whilst it is quite daunting to think about self-advocacy, as long as you know what you want, what you need, and you feel confident and comfortable having those discussions, absolutely use those areas and those kind of organisations for support and guidance. But you can also get formal kind of advocacy support if that's something that you would like for yourself.
I think it would also be great if companies also came with that lovely list of things you started in that answer to that question, when you reeled off a whole list of adjustments that might potentially be things that need to change. If companies came to the person coming into their company with, this is the list of areas that we can cover for you. Tell us how you are with all of these, so that the autistic person can think, actually, I'm fine with X, Y, and Z, but I'm really not fine. Number 3 is the one on my list that I'm definitely going to have a struggle with. Because I think sometimes we don't know what we're struggling with until we're struggling with it.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that, as I mentioned earlier, we do for our kind of advisory work through our inclusion service. So looking at kind of a neuro profile. So looking at companies where their maturity is at, and understanding all the different areas of processing that all employees might need, because everyone processes information differently. What neuroprofiles do they have for every employee they have, and what are the kind of areas of adjustments that might be required? As I say, the executive functioning, processing information, sensory need, and so on. So that's an area where an employer can start to understand all of their employees and areas adjustments they may need, in addition to those that may need specific reasonable adjustments.
I love the way that you talk about the maturity of the company.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear a lot more of that. Let's just assess the maturity of the company.
So the neuromaturity, yeah. Exactly.
Neuromaturity. Oh, that's a new word for me, Russ.
Yeah.
I've got that one. You'll be hearing that one again.
Yeah, I just love how because it's hard, like I said, to learn to advocate for yourself, and it's hard to know. Oh wait, do I not have to do this? Does it not have to be this?
Yeah.
This hard. I had no idea. And it can be really hard to feel allowed to actually have an adjustment. And so to have that level of support is amazing.
Like a really simple thing, like I really want to have a friend because friends are important to me. However, I absolutely flatly refuse to do any socialising after work. So that's a discussion I would, that's probably, right guys, if you're listening, that's the next podcast series. We need to talk about how we do that. Okay, Lou, let's turn to you. What advice, I'm just thinking about someone who's just been newly diagnosed. What advice would you give to that new person who's just gone, or that person who's got a new diagnosis?
I think, first of all, congratulations and welcome.
Yeah, I'm giving a moment. Yeah, round of applause. There we go. Go on, Lou.
Yeah, definitely 100% welcome and big celebration. You've worked out who you are, and that's really good and a really positive thing. So I think I'd say that, but also get to understand what being autistic means to you, because obviously it's so different for everyone. So you can do that kind of by thinking about your own experiences so far, or looking at other people's experiences online, talking to other autistic people you might know. So that can be quite helpful, but also thinking about what you would like in your life to change, if anything. So making adjustments for yourself, perhaps being a little bit less harsh on yourself. Now you have this understanding that actually, no, it's not that you need to always adjust yourself, but actually society needs to adjust for you too. So considering that, for example, when I was diagnosed, I at school had some different things put in place. So for example, I was then allowed to leave the classroom when I got overwhelmed. So instead of just sitting there and getting really stressed and upset, I'd actually give myself permission to think, actually it's okay for me to take 5 minutes outside. I'm dealing with things that other people aren't necessarily dealing with in terms of in the sensory environment. So I think that kind of thing is really helpful. But just thinking about how you want to go forward, whether you want to tell people, whether you want to tell some people, whether you want to tell everyone, whether you don't really want to tell anyone at all. I guess just considering things like that can be quite helpful when you're first diagnosed too, in terms of what's comfortable for you and how you want to move forward, because obviously everyone's very different and takes the process differently.
Lou, you are such a brilliant autism advocate, can I just say? I'm
Thank
so
you.
wow, I want to play this podcast to everyone. Okay, guys, final question then. If we're looking to the future, we're imagining what the world might look like in 5 or 10 years from now. What would be your aspirations? Let's go to Kath first with this one.
I think ideally, autism shouldn't need to be medicalised. In a way, it seems bizarre you need to go to a doctor to get a diagnosis. It would be incredible if social expectations, education and employment was adapted and so flexible and responsive to accommodate all needs and preferences that you didn't need a medical diagnosis to be able to have that in place. And I hate this idea that tolerance and empathy and flexibility has all these negative associations. I find that really, really difficult, and I don't even know when it happened. When did it happen that became something to be derided? It sort of happened subtly. So I don't want neurodiversity to be viewed through this lens of scepticism and eye rolls. People just need to educate themselves and be cool. We're not asking for anything outrageous.
Just be cool.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, Kath. That's wonderful. Russ, what about for you?
Yeah, so I thought about this. I think I think we've got there's two strands. So firstly, we want to provide enough neurodivergent people with a sense of agency and confidence, firstly, to understand the strengths that they have and the worth of it, and to self-advocate, as we said, that advocating for your needs is your right, to request reasonable adjustments, and that needs to be normalised and become commonplace. On the flip side, we need to have organisations that are trained to understand autism and neurodivergent conditions, so they're familiar with the social model of disability, because what we talk about a lot is this medical model. That it's the individual that needs to change, when actually it's society that becomes disabling, and it's society that needs to change in terms of accommodating difference. And I extend that to kind of champions as well. I think we, a lot of the time, we see is, particularly in our clients, the reason it works is because there's champions and advocates who have a lived experience and a personal experience and a connection, and that's brilliant. But what I think we need to do is that it needs to expand out to those that don't have a connection, who just understand that this is the right thing to do, this for societal importance, to create a neuro-inclusive environment. So yeah, we're currently having these conversations in parallel, aren't we, between autistic job seekers and employers. But I think what we want to do is kind of, it's a movement, bring everyone together, and create and align that understanding and awareness. So whether that takes 5, 10, 20 years, it remains to be seen. But I think until then, I think we'll keep doing what we're doing, and Auticon will keep doing what we do as well.
Yeah, and thank you for all you do at Auticon. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. Lou, what about for you? What would you like to see?
I think I'd like the world to be more accepting and understanding of autism and autistic strengths, and for the world to adapt to us too, instead of just expecting us to adapt quite a lot of the time, and for autistic people to feel comfortable in the fact that as autistic people, their dreams and their what they'd like for their lives is possible without having to change themselves, and for there needs to be accommodated and supported, and for autistic people to feel empowered. Wow.
I don't think I've got anything to say after that. I feel like you guys need to be running the country, quite frankly. It's fantastic. And if you are someone who is thinking, I think I might be autistic, or one of my loved ones is autistic, or my friend's autistic, it's not a life sentence. It's just an explanation. And, you've been given so much gold here today with all of the, you guys have named different organisations. You've given us pathways. You've given us hope. And I just want to thank you for that, and encourage anybody who's on that journey to keep going along the road. Thank you for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. If you'd like to know more about the podcast, would be interested in applying for a job as an Auticon consultant, or would like further information about how Auticon can help support your business, please visit auticon.co.uk. This episode was recorded in March 2023. Recording and production was at Strathmore Studios in Clerkenwell, London. It was engineered by Alex Brown and Jonas Gustafsson. Edited by Billy Godfrey, and music was by The Lethargies. That's all from us this time. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.